hasn't been such a quiet week in Lake Wobegon. Garrison Keillor, America's foremost storyteller and Lake Wobegon's most prominent of citizens, retired at the conclusion of the Prairie Home Companion radio show last Saturday. That was the last one. And then all things fell apart in America this week. Down the road from Lake Wobegon in Falcon Heights, a well-loved African-American school cafeteria worker named Phil Castle was shot by a white police officer during a traffic stop. That was on Wednesday night. And then that incident had happened on the heels of the shooting of another black man, Alton Sterling, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on Tuesday morning. And the African-American community started to feel like they were under siege. And lots of people took to the streets to demonstrate, to express their anger and their rage at what had been happening to them. And on Thursday night, 5 police officers were shot and killed by an African-American sniper in Dallas, literally just a couple of blocks from where President Kennedy had been assassinated in 1963 by the grassy knoll. And the attack came during a peaceful demonstration. And I'm in no way trying to stir up fear or to cast blame about these situations. I'm just pointing out that it was not such a quiet week. And I'm beginning to wonder if Garrison Keillor retired because it is getting harder and harder for Americans to relate to his mythical Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong and all the men are good-looking and all the children are above average. The injustices of the world are weighing heavy on us at this point. And then it seems like it's no accident that the next beatitude in our study is about justice. It comes to us in a very timely manner this week. Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who are hungry or who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. And the Greek word that's rendered righteousness in the New International Version, which is what we read a minute ago, and also in the Common English Bible, can just as easily be rendered justice as it is in the New Living Translation. They are the same word. They are the flip sides of the same coin. Righteousness is, in my mind, as I differentiate the two, righteousness is usually about the individual's right living, and justice is about society's right living. And in the Beatitude, I believe that the emphasis falls on the side of a justice translation, and that would be my preferred translation at this point. For in the kingdom of God, those who are poor now, which would be consistent with verses 3, 4, and 5 here in Matthew 5, that is, those who are the victims of injustice will experience justice. Those who long for God to make things right now will be satisfied. And the unspoken assumption, which is informed by the emphases in the prophets, is that most who are poor are that way because of some kind of social injustice. Yet true justice is also predicated on a kind of godly righteousness. To seek one is to seek the other. Righteousness and justice are inseparable. To seek justice and to seek righteousness are the same thing. They are inseparable. And inseparable is the English power word of the week. If you're working on building that vocabulary in English, if something cannot be separated, it is inseparable. If something is permanently glued to something else, those two things are inseparable. And righteousness and justice are inseparable ideas. So here's the authorized Boydston paraphrase. Blessed are the right living folk who are hungry and thirsty for justice. Eventually, as the kingdom of heaven emerges, those cravings will be satisfied. Remember, the kingdom of heaven is the background of all of these Beatitudes. We see it in the first verse, or the first of the Beatitudes and the last of the Beatitudes. It's a sandwich effect. This is all about the kingdom of heaven. And this is a message of hope and a message of encouragement for all who would align themselves with Jesus and with his kingdom of heaven. So, I think that there are actually three ways to spin this verse this morning. Again, all of these ways are interrelated and they are all valid, but what we emphasize about them might have to do more with the context in which we are trying to apply it. So if you're living in Lake Wobegon, where the injustices are few, and they're far between, of course, but where there are a lot of personal small-town breaches of righteousness we're going to accentuate a different aspect of that beatitude than if we're in a context where you are an ethnic minority and you feel under siege by the authorities. If you are endlessly harassed, if you are provoked, if you are under suspicion just because of your skin color or just because of your culture, perhaps a little different dimension of this verse will resonate with you. Still, we need to hear all three ways of spinning the Beatitude, for they are all pointing to something about Jesus, and it is with him and his kingdom that we have chosen to align our lives. The first one is this, my first spin. God blesses those who are denied justice, but continue to crave it. If they endure, they will be satisfied as the kingdom of heaven catches on. God blesses those who are denied justice, but continue to crave it. If they endure, they will be satisfied as the kingdom of heaven catches on. Most every single Jew of the first century was a victim of injustice. Jews were despised by the pagan societies around them. And the land of Israel, in that particular place, they were under siege. They were under the control of a brutal Roman Empire. Then, if you also happened to be a follower of Jesus, you became despised by your own Jewish kinsmen. And so you were despised by them, and you were loathed by the Romans even more because you refused to acknowledge that Caesar is Lord. People lost their property. Christians were forced into servitude. They were imprisoned. They were murdered. And the protections of the law were a fictitious myth. And you were likely to be poor. You were likely to be victimized. You were likely to be marginalized. So imagine if that describes you, and you considered yourself to be the most of unblessed people. For you had no symbols of success in your life. You didn't have a nice house. You didn't have a luxury chariot. You had no cash on hand to throw parties when you needed to throw some parties to impress the neighbors. You had no titles of recognition in the society. To the contrary, you lived on the edge. And you were always in danger of starvation. No one was really ever, even if you were well off, you were never really more than a few weeks away from starvation. Food and water security did not exist. Then if you got sick or didn't have any family members to depend on, people would take advantage of your weakness and you became hopeless. But Jesus says to people in this context, he says, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for you will be filled." In the kingdom that Jesus is inaugurating, that he is starting, those who don't cave in and lose themselves in the mire of hopelessness they will be blessed with more than a fill of justice. It's coming. Don't give up, he's saying. And certainly don't try to force justice through violence or by acting unjustly yourself. For violence merely perpetuates more violence, and injustice erodes the ground upon which you stand. No, the only way to break the cycle of injustice in a significant manner is to participate in the kingdom of heaven. That is, to act justly yourself, to live by the rules of this emerging heavenly order, where you give yourself over to loving God and loving your neighbor, even the worst of your neighbors. Justice in the Bible is less about keeping a set of rules. Justice is not impartial, keeping the law code. That's a modern understanding of justice. But justice in the Bible is about love and applying mercy and fairness to a situation so that the right thing is done. The thing that God would do would be the right thing, the righteousness. God's justice is more it's more restorative than punitive. And even when it is punitive, it's always with the eye of restoring or causing somebody to become whole and healthy again. And this is how the kingdom of heaven operates. Lovingly doing the right thing, the thing that God would do. The results will likely not be instant, but the waves of justice, don't worry about it, the waves of justice will roll in eventually. I love the imagery of the prophet Amos. God says, I hate your show and pretense, the hypocrisy of your religious festivals, your solemn assemblies, and worship experiences. I will not accept your burnt offerings and grain offerings. I won't even notice all your choice peace offerings. Away with your noisy hymns of praise, even if they're done with a ukulele. I will not listen to the music of your harps, your guitars, your ukuleles, or your drums. Instead, I want to see a mighty flood of justice, an endless river of right living. Justice is a flood. Envision this flood of justice is coming upon the community. An endless river of righteousness, living righteousness. Well, what a great promise. What a hope, especially after a week such as what we've had. The second way of spinning the Beatitude is this. God blesses those who see the injustices others experience and crave for justice in the world. If they endure, they will be satisfied as the kingdom of heaven catches on. In the first spinning of it, the Beatitude comes as a word of hope and blessing of those who are personally experiencing injustice. Those who are poor, those who are on the margins, those who are the victims. In the second spin, the Beatitude comes as a word of encouragement and blessing to those who are advocates, craving for justice for those who have been treated unfairly. Now, I'm sure that I have been treated unfairly at times in my life. But the offenses are so small that I've been able to forget them, and I can't remember when I've been treated unfairly. I'm not a victim. I've more or less lived a Lake Wobegon life in a Lake Wobegon world. And the temptation is to see that as normal, and that anyone who wants to can live such a life in such a nice, interesting world. If they just do the right things, it will happen. And if they're not living in the world, in that world, the world that they want, they must be doing something wrong. From my position of privilege, I judge the world that way. For frankly, the good life that I experience is, well, it's actually one that I've inherited. My basic needs are met. And I could get so caught up in living my good life that I cease to care and really care about those who have been left out, who haven't been so fortunate as I've been. Or I could use my position of strength to hunger and thirst for justice for others, to crave for things to be set right for my neighbors, so that the little boys of color don't have to grow up fearing cops, so that I don't have to worry about Matthew, who has darker skin than we have in my family, who's a part of us, and he rides his bike to work at the Jack in the Box at 4 in the afternoon, comes home on that bike at 4 in the morning. And so he's out there in the middle of the night as a young black man. And I worry about him, I mean, because they can be doing everything right, working, having a job, and riding his bike home from work in the middle of the night. And it's possible that he could end up in an unprovoked encounter with the police, or just trying to figure out what he's doing out there in the middle of the night. Now, it's not fair, but those guys get singled out for extra attention. And they're not treated well when they get the attention. A few months ago, I noticed an African-American woman. Maybe she was 85 years old. She was in her house coat. It was in the middle of the afternoon, and she was in a wheelchair. And she was parked under a tree by the side of the road as I was riding my bike along. So I stopped to check on her. And I talked to her for quite a while. And then another guy came by who was on a motor scooter, and he saw me talking to her, and he stopped to check, and I'm sure he was making sure that I was not harassing her. He was being a good advocate for justice. You know, I'm glad he stopped. And after we talked, he was so concerned about the mental health of this woman that he called the police. And so the police came, and then the paramedics came. And she'd been freely talking with me, but when the police got there, she got all defensive and started acting really threatening. And I was astonished at how rude and how impatient both the police and the fire department was, the paramedics. And I was actually glad that I was there, because I felt like my presence helped calm that situation. And I began to see firsthand how scary it can be if you are vulnerable. But we can be a calming presence and an advocate for people in those positions. An advocates for justice. And frankly, it doesn't require a protest or a demonstration march. No, often it can just be a kind word, or merely your presence, merely being there in a supportive presence, merely being willing to listen and really hear what people are saying. I deal with the police on a fairly regular basis, and a few years ago I noticed that we did not have any African-American cops in Laveen, in spite of the fact that we have a very significant African-American population here. And so I approached the precinct commander and mentioned my concern about the fact that they didn't have any people of color that were patrolling the streets here. And he was a great guy, and he noted it, and he said that it was one of his goals to add more black cops, but that there was a shortage, and they were under a hiring freeze at that point. Now, I don't know if it had anything to do with what I had said, but a few weeks later, I noticed that suddenly we had an African-American cop patrolling the streets. And then we had a second African-American cop that was patrolling our streets. And I was proud of that commander, you know, that he had figured out how to make that happen. And even though there's still a shortage, I'm convinced that those few African-American cops are a more trusted police presence to our African-American neighbors. And I'm grateful that the police were responsive given the constraints under which they work. That's kind of practical advocacy. I didn't think that out. I mean, it just happened. And it's not flashy. It doesn't involve being political. It doesn't involve being demanding. It doesn't involve being pushy. And if we crave justice for our neighbors, we need to look for ways to speak on their behalf, even if it's just a few choice words at an appropriate time that God sets in front of us. The third way of spinning the Beatitude is this. God blesses those who crave after the right kind of relationship with Him. If they endure, they will be satisfied as the kingdom of heaven catches on. Those who crave after the right kind of relationship with Him. A couple of quotes here. The first is from John Stott. I mentioned him before, and his commentary on the Beatitudes. Christians are committed to hunger for righteousness in the whole community, the whole human community, as something pleasing to a righteous God. That is, we're driven to righteousness because we're dealing with a righteous God. And then Tasher, who's written a commentary on Matthew, puts it this way. He says, those who hunger and thirst after righteousness are those who, because they long to see God's final triumph over evil and His kingdom fully established, long also to do what is right and act justly themselves. All such have the growing satisfaction knowing that they are furthering and not thwarting God's purposes. The justice that we seek for ourselves and which we seek for others is an expression of our righteous relationship with God. Righteousness means right living or correct living. God is righteous. He sent His Son to be the righteous sacrifice that led to our own reconciliation with Him. And the fact that the Holy Spirit of God lives in us enables us to live righteously, to free the righteousness of God to operate through us. And the reason that our hunger and thirst for righteousness is satisfied is that we allow the Spirit to live through us. But if there is no hunger and there's no thirst for right living and right relationship with God, that means that we are blocking the work of the Spirit. It also means that any expression of justice is going to be less than godly. Perhaps it would be reliant on kingdom of the world rules rather than kingdom of heaven directives. For the Beatitudes are all about what it means, what happens as the kingdom of heaven emerges. And the key point this morning is actually the authorized Boydston paraphrase of verse 6. Here it is again. Blessed are the right living folk who are hungry and thirsty for justice. Eventually, as the kingdom of heaven emerges, those cravings will be satisfied. And the challenge in front of us in these post-Lake Wobegon days is to keep the hunger and thirst for justice and right living active. Whether it's for ourselves as an individual or whether it's for the neighbor who's experiencing injustice. You know, it's really tempting to give up when we fail to see progress. It's tempting then to start craving after things which make us feel good temporarily, but ultimately will be less satisfying. So the message here of Jesus is stay hopeful. Stay active in the pursuit of justice. Stay active in the pursuit of righteousness for yourself and for others. And I guarantee you that by the grace of God, you will be blessed with more than you can imagine. Blessed are the right living folk who are hungry and thirsty for justice. Eventually, as the kingdom of heaven emerges, those cravings will be satisfied. And that is the good news. So, who would like to ask a question, share an additional insight from the passage, or give testimony in some way that that you see God at work in your own life?
I think most of the people, they understand about the justice and righteousness is on the world view.
They have a worldly view of justice and righteousness.
So,
okay.
and this is what I understand, the world view of the righteousness and justice for the human never satisfied.
It's never satisfied.
Yeah. And the people think, and you in the different angle to looking for the justice and righteousness is different. You are public, if you are public, you think you are doing the right things for the people, for the community. But if you are the resident of the community, you may think the police they don't do the right things. They don't really protect us, Allah. So I think this is the conflict of the world, most of the conflict, because we looking for the righteousness and the justice, the meaning of this one in different angle. Some people maybe is selfless in the selfless view, but some people not, but still it's not the right one.
Yeah,
so
but
only God's righteousness.
Yeah, God's righteousness is what drives us and what defines what we are seeking to accomplish with this loving fairness, concern for our neighbors.
Yeah, but the problem is most of the people they don't. Even me, I don't see through about God's righteousness and justice. Because in our mind, our thinking, our understanding, we never understand God's righteousness and justice.
We don't see it at all in its fullness. We don't say that this isn't doing it. There's still problems. What are we going to do? Well, we need to get an army and go shoot people.
Yes.
I mean, but that's Jesus is saying, no, hold off. Hang back, be patient. We're going to work on my system of justice, and we'll get this done as the kingdom of God emerges. So pour your energy into living out the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of God, and it will be okay. Your cravings, your hunger, and your thirst will be satisfied. You will be blessed with satisfaction.
Yes, if we don't use our own view to look at justice and the righteousness, and then we will be satisfied because we understand this one.
Yeah, but maybe even now, but maybe even there's a future dimension to it because the kingdom of heaven is not fully implemented. It's in the process of unfolding and emerging. And so we're always in this state of conflict because we live in an era where it's not completely out there yet, but we're living by the rules of something that is coming. We are living by the standards of the kingdom of heaven, which is not fully here yet. And so that's always going to be a rub for us. It's always going to be a point of tension for us. But the point of the Beatitude is, yeah, that tension will be there, but don't give up. You will be blessed. Someone else.
So I think, for me, my opinions, I don't discuss about the justice and righteousness, about the war, about the people, what they do, right or wrong. I don't discuss about this one. I don't want to discuss about this one.
Well, you want to discuss it because it's a concern, and there are people that are being victimized but you don't necessarily discuss it in the same level and in the same way as everybody else. You have a different perspective.
But if you discuss about this one with the people, it leads to make conflict.
It is, but
so
you
based
sometimes
on this one can become a peacemaker and don't discuss most of the time.
But sometimes, in order to be a peacemaker, you have to talk about the issues. You can't just pretend that they don't exist. You have to be able to discuss them, and in the way that you discuss them in a peaceful, calm manner, and you're not accusing anybody of anything, you are creating peace. You are contributing to a greater justice by doing that.
Okay, maybe I think I got it, but I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah.
It's okay, for example, and when you work in a group, and people hide in the darkness, their own darkness,
Yeah.
and they don't want to expose their wrongdoing, their evil thinking,
Yeah.
and they do it their own things, but without justice and righteousness. They do the wrong things, they make a lot of mistakes, but they hide it. It looks like they hide it, but people in the group, everybody understand each other. Understand each other is they doing something wrong, and they just pretend to nothing.
Yeah.
So in this way, you mean become a peacemaker, because looks like the group is very calm and very peace, but exactly under the peace have a lot of waves.
But here's what it requires is a kind of wisdom to be able to deal with the issues in a way that gets to the issue without stirring the surface up.
Yes.
To get below the surface, and that requires wisdom and experience to do that.
This what I mean. This is the hard part.
This is the hard part.
Yes.
But just as because it's hard doesn't mean we don't.
It's not because we don't know it. We know it, but we don't want to stir up the wave and make conflict.
This is more. As an Asian, you experience it differently than I do as an American Caucasian, because you come out of a more faith society where the concern is about the shame that you would bring on people by presenting what their faults are in a public way. And so you're very much more sensitive to that than maybe I am. And that's actually a good thing. Because then you can start to deal with it underneath the surface in an indirect way rather than necessarily in a direct way. Americans, we tend to want to do things in a very direct way, and we want to confront it directly, whereas the Asian cultures tend to, and African cultures, I think as well, tend to want to do things in a more indirect way. And so there's value in both. One's not better than the other, but I think there's strength in what you say.
I think you understand about the Asian people is already out. So far, I don't know in China or in Japan, in Korea, they still use these methods to fix the problem. But this what I understand. Now in the American and Asian people, they don't really use this method already. Yeah. They use the direct dialogue to fix the problem. It's not the same as the American really strict, but we try to use these methods.
Yeah, it's a hybrid between the two. Yeah.
And we use the between. Yeah. It's not so directly to hurt people, but we don't use the other way to the other people to fix this problem. We don't use this one, and most of the time we do in the middle.
Yeah. So what we need to do is pray that God will give us wisdom to do it in whatever context.